Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia. Lauren K McKellar, an Aussie author based on the New South Wales North Coast, is no stranger to publishing. She is an editor and writer and has published a massive 19 novels in the romance space. And according to Lauren, when she's not mothering her 3 children, she's either working on her own novels or those of international best-selling authors. Now, last month, Lauren's first women's fiction novel called The Calendar Mums was published by HQ Fiction. And listeners, I couldn't have loved it more. Tender, funny, and heartbreaking all at once, this novel was a celebration of women as well as female friendship, and at its heart explores what it means to be a mother. I simply couldn't put it down. Think The Calendar Girls meets Big Little Lies. I don't know if anyone said that before, but that's what sort of came to my mind when I was reading it. It's an absolutely delightful novel that I'm sure will resonate with many readers out there. And of course, Lauren is joining me on the podcast today. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. And oh my gosh, what a beautiful intro. This is a testament to motherhood. I am tearing up, and I know it's probably just hormones because I was up really late last night with children who wouldn't sleep. So I'm sure it's not just that I'm that much of a random person that I'm crying at the drop of a hat, but that was just such a beautiful intro. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Congratulations on The Calendar Mums. It's only just out, but what kind of response are you getting to the novel so far?
Thank you. It's been really positive, honestly. I feel like I've had so many people reach out to me and say how much they've enjoyed it, which I just feel absolutely blessed. I've heard from a lot of people too that it's helped them have big conversations, which is something that I did want to spur with the novel, because I do touch on some darker themes in there as well as some lighthearted ones. And so I like that it's had both that impact that people are enjoying it, but it's also making conversations easier.
Indeed. And as I mentioned in my introduction, you've been writing for a long time, but The Calendar Mums is your first foray into women's fiction. So what prompted the change? Was it deliberate or more about the story that you wanted to tell?
It was a deliberate change, but also about the story. So it was both of those things. What happened was I'd actually started, while most of my novels are romance, when I first started writing in the young adult space. Well, if you want to go all the way back, when I was 12 or something, I wrote my first novel about a group of witches in a high school in a lined exercise book at my grandparents' news agency. But then when I started writing professionally, it was when I was in my mid-20s, and that's when I wrote my first young adult book. And it was also published with Harlequin. It was with Harlequin's Escape Line. But at that time, I was also editing, and I was editing young adult books. And one of my young adult books that I'd edited went quite well. And someone else contacted me and said, "Oh, I've got a book that I've just written, but it's adult. Would you be interested in editing it?" And at that time, it was just around when 50 Shades of Grey came out. And I just thought she meant it was a book for grown-ups. I didn't realize that by adult, she meant, something else entirely. And I went from a person who would blush saying the word penis to reading a very eye-opening novel, let me tell you. But it became a bestseller, this book that I'd edited. And then all of a sudden, lots of other romance authors were contacting me. And I just fell in love with the genre. And I thought, yes, romance is where I'm at. And so I started writing in that space as well. But what triggered the change from romance for me over to women's fiction was, surprise, having babies. My partner and I tried for quite a long time before we fell pregnant with our first child. We do have 3 beautiful children now, but we tried for ages and we couldn't fall pregnant, and it was really emotional. Obviously, as anyone who's had troubles conceiving knows, it becomes all-consuming. And then we had this baby, and my son, my oldest, oh my gosh, he's a beautiful boy now, but he was a terrible baby. He was one of those children who would be crying all the time. He had all the things, would only sleep for 90-minute periods, reflux, didn't latch well, feeding issues, underweight, vomiting, all the things. So it was a lot. And I remember thinking quite often, I wanted this for so long. I should just be grateful. But I shouldn't be upset about this. Just suck it up. And so I think I felt a lot of guilt over not feeling this joy that I'd imagined would happen as soon as I gave birth to a child. It lasted for quite a while. Obviously, he was sad too. We were both in a sad place for about 9 months. He used to cry every time we hopped in the car, which on short trips was manageable. But the only way we could get him to stop crying was if we played, there's a song by Justin Timberlake called Can't Stop the Feeling. If we played that song on repeat, he would not cry. Again, short trips, manageable. I had to do a book signing in Melbourne, and I'm from just north of Sydney. So we had 10 hours of Can't Stop the Feeling on repeat in the car. Because even if he slept, if we turned it off while he was sleeping, he would wake. Like he knew, he was like connected to that song. It was wild. It got to the point where life just felt really difficult. And I remember once I'd gone back to work as well, because financially that's just what we needed to do. But I was not in a good place, and I didn't really realize until I'd driven on the freeway to go down to a meeting in Sydney. And as I was driving back, there's this big bridge that you can drive over. And I remember thinking as I was driving over the bridge, it would be pretty nice just to drive off the bridge instead. And that was a real trigger for me, because that's not a normal person thought. That's not a healthy thought, obviously. So that spurred me to go get help. I went and saw, a therapist, and there was, different forms of intervention. When we fell pregnant with our second child, because yes, despite having nightmare child number one, we got over it and we realized, no, let's do more. I went into that experience thinking, well, I really want to be better equipped, because I knew that I'd gone into such a dark place with my first child, and that wasn't like me. So I thought, well, I want to make sure that I've got tools to help get me out of it. And writing was something that my therapist and I had talked about previously, but it's also been something that's been there for me my entire life when I've gone through hard times. I communicate with the written word much better than I do the spoken one. So I thought, okay, the day I come home from hospital, I'm going to start writing. It might just be 5 words, it might be more, but I'm going to make sure that every day, even if I've only got 5 minutes, I put something on a page. And because my interests, don't get me wrong, I still liked my husband, but I'm sure that, anyone who's gone through labor can understand that, the love does vary during that labor period. Obviously, I'm joking. Love you, Pete. Because of that, the subject matter at my heart, it was motherhood. I wanted to write about being a mum and the journeys that we all go on after we fall in love.
There's so much to unpack in everything that you've just said there. But I wondered, Lauren, for those who haven't yet read this book, could you tell us a little bit more about the story?
Absolutely. So the story is about a group of women who are in a mothers group in a small town in country Australia. And the place where they hold their mothers group, it's a community centre, and the room where it's being held has black mold in the ceiling in the air conditioning unit. So they say, well, no mothers group for you. We're going to move this online. I don't know if anyone who's been in a mothers group would know. It's online is just not the same. I've done both in person and online because my third child was was around during COVID. And you just can't hold a nappy up to the screen and say, would you say this is healthy green or like unhealthy green online? It doesn't work. So this issue obviously is something that the women in this mothers group think, well, okay, we need to fundraise to get a new air conditioner so that we can keep the mothers group alive in person. And they think the best way to do this is to shoot a calendar starring themselves in the nude.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. As I said, it was very reminiscent of The Calendar Girls, a movie that I just loved. And it's quite a while back now, but it's a gorgeous movie. I will remember those first few months as a new mum, Lauren. And like Tali, one of the young mums in this book, I moved away from my family to a small country town. I'm from Sydney originally. So not only were my surroundings new, but I had no one to lean on or to seek advice from until I found a group of new mothers at the local baby clinic, which was such a lifeline for me. So I well understand that this can be a difficult time for many women, and having proper support services is essential in this time. And as you say, it's not good enough to be meeting online. To that end, I guess I wondered if there was a particular event or a set of circumstances that sort of led you to be inspired to write this particular opening to the novel.
As I said, my first child was like pretty difficult. And I remember being in a mother's group and looking around the room, and there was about 20 other mothers there with their babies. And so there was 19 gorgeous babies lying on a circle on the floor, all cooing and gurgling and, like grasping at the air in that fanciful way that babies have. And then there's me, and my baby couldn't touch the floor. The floor was lava. And not only did he have to be held, he had to be rocked, and rocked vigorously, and often with a big sort of stomp walk at the same time. So it was like a full body experience. And I just remember looking at these people, and as I'm doing this crazy walk and they're all looking so serene and chill, the nurse saying, "Let's all talk about our birth." And I just remember thinking, I don't know any of you women, and I'm supposed to discuss with you like my vagina? What? This is weird. All we have in common is the date that we had sex. Like, this doesn't make sense. But as I went to the sessions, I discovered how great it was to have that community. And I'm still close friends with many of the women in that group today. And I feel so blessed to have had that because, they say it takes a village, and it does, but it's not always the village that you already have. Sometimes you need a new village to help you raise kids. So that was, I guess, a real trigger for the start of the story for me.
Yeah, fantastic. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, but there are so many wonderful moments in this book that showcase the importance of connection and support for women as they navigate the big milestone life events involved in giving birth and becoming mothers. But you also delve into the darker side of motherhood that not everyone talks about. The things like body changes, postnatal depression, which you kind of touched on a little bit earlier, loss of identity, loss of income, and often the isolation of being at home with an infant or small child can bring on. Were these themes that you explicitly wanted to explore in this novel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're all themes that are really important to me. They're themes that have impacted me in one way or another, most definitely. And in particular, when we talk about loss of identity, because I think we focus a lot on growing up, and then we're a teenager. And when we finish being a teenager, we reach, our 20s, and we have a career, and that helps define us. I mean, it's like one of the first questions anybody asks you when you meet them, right? Oh, what do you do for a living? And so when you become a mom, for me at least, I felt that sense of loss of identity. Oh, well, I'm not Lauren who's writing novels at the moment, or who's an editor. Or even though when I did go back to work, yes, I was doing those things on the side, but it didn't feel like who I was anymore because I was entirely consumed in slavery by these three small humans. So that loss of identity thing, I think, is really big. And it's still something I think about today. In a book that I'm working on at the moment, I'm exploring it because it's sort of, I don't know if you went through anything like this, but I feel like, what do I even do to have fun? I don't know. Like, who am I? And I think that lots of women do go through that sort of stage where they have that redefinition of their life when they're sort of at about my age, where you've got kids in school now, and I'm in my mid-40s. So it's all those sort of things happening. But also when we talk about things like body image, I think that's a really natural thing to be aware of because, again, after birth and as you get older, our bodies change. So I wanted to talk about that too. The other thing that I think was important to me as well was that one of the characters in the book, a lady named Ria, she's always been a very career focused person, very career driven. And now that this is their second child, she's agreed that she'll take a back seat and let her husband chase his dreams while she's the stay-at-home mother. And she talks about this sense of feeling like it's not coming naturally to her. Why isn't it coming naturally? Even if on the outside it looks like it is. And that's something that I think a lot of people go through, and it's certainly something I went through as well.
Talking about Ria, you've got three really fantastic point of view characters in this novel. So Ria, Samantha, and Tali. So were they inspired by particular women you knew or heard of, or were they an amalgamation of women that you'd kind of met and their different experiences?
It was a bit of everything. So there's definitely a large portion of me in each of them. But aside from that, I wouldn't say I was inspired by specific people. Writing the book was my own personal therapy.
Yeah.
But the things about them that make them different, I really enjoyed exploring. And certainly when it came to some of the darker issues, I mean, obviously I've said that I've had some problems with postnatal depression. That's not a secret, as well as anxiety, something that I've often battled with throughout my life. And because I'm only one person and one viewpoint, though, when it came to researching some of these darker themes, I did reach out online and had lots of women who came to me and were willing to share their experiences anonymously, just so I could try and flesh these out as individual characters and not just carbon copies of myself, which no one would want to read.
Oh, I don't know about that. As readers, we get a glimpse into how important it is in these vulnerable and sensitive months after the birth of a child to have people in your life who love you unconditionally. Because let's face it, it can be hard as a new mum to come to terms with the havoc that pregnancy and childbirth wreaks on your body. And I think what you've done so incredibly well in this novel, Lauren, is you're able to demonstrate this with great effect, getting insight into each woman's innermost thoughts and the pressure points as she navigates her own path towards being involved in this fundraiser. Now, if someone had asked me to do this in the first few months of the birth of my first child, I would have run for the hills. There would have been no way I would have had the courage or the confidence to do what these women did. But I so admire them at the same time for getting out of their own heads and focusing on the bigger picture. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you wanted to achieve by exploring this particular issue in the novel?
Of course. I feel like body image is always a thing. And I think that when we talk about loss of identity on the inside, it can often sometimes feel easier to focus on the changing identity on the outside as being something that sort of, I guess, has a more visible presentation. So I thought by using this, it sort of serves a bit as well as that sort of like a metaphor for what they're going, the transformation they're going through internally as well as externally as they feel more confident to do the shoot. But I think it's important too that not all of them agreed to do the shoot straight away, because much like yourself, I could not have imagined saying yes to a shoot like that. I would get so stressed about breastfeeding and accidentally flashing a nipple in public, which I know I shouldn't be ashamed of. But at the time, you've got all these big thoughts going on in your head. And so for me, that felt pretty confronting. But what I wanted to do was show these women overcoming that fear, because I think something like that as well can really, I mean, the tagline for the book is they're shedding their secrets along with their clothes. Because once you've got external nudity, internal nudity, I guess, becomes a little bit easier. You've been vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that I, necessarily would have thought about being ashamed of my body, but just lack of confidence.
Yes, that's absolutely what I meant. Definitely not
Yeah.
ashamed. That doesn't sound, yeah.
No. I didn't mean that you thought that specifically. I was just thinking of my own self. I guess for these women, a big part of them having the confidence to do this was the friendship that they formed with the women at the Hickory Creek Mothers Group, wasn't it?
Most definitely. It was the friendship that they formed that helped give them the internal confidence they needed.
Now, I want to talk about Rhea. You spoke about her a little bit earlier, and she was this kind of larger than life spiritual woman whose identity was very much connected to her business achievements. She'd had this like uber successful business but prior to having her second child. So when she takes that step back from her career to be a stay-at-home mum, she really struggles. And so I wanted to ask you, was it really fair of her husband to expect her to be just a mother and wife? I mean, not that there's anything wrong with being just a mother and wife if that's what you want to do, but it was so kind of antithetical to the kind of person that she was. And he was quite opposed to her being involved in anything that kind of took her away from that, wasn't he?
He was, definitely. I think that, was it fair? Probably not. But I think that he'd felt like he had to take the back seat for so long to let her follow her dreams. His dream had always been to open this bar slash cafe that he has, and he'd never been able to do that. And so he really wanted to do it. And what I did explore within the book as well is that while she was struggling with feeling like, being a mum isn't coming naturally to me and I want to be working in a business, I think he'd done the opposite. His whole life, he'd been supporting and he'd been the parent who'd stayed at home with their older child, and he'd wanted to have this business. And now he's got this business and he's realized, actually, I don't know that this is what I want either. But he was a bit too proud to admit it until, certainly at the start of the book. So I wanted to explore that idea of it's not the grass is always greener, but the things that we think we want, they're not always what we think we want, or perhaps they're not always what we need.
Yeah, and not always what we're good at.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
I loved that. The nuance with these two characters was really terrific. And I loved that you explored that sort of, a central issue from both points of view.
Thank you. And I really wanted to show because the other two women don't begin the book with what you would consider to be a traditional relationship. So I really wanted to focus on that idea of almost falling in love again and finding that, something that discovering something in your partner that maybe you didn't see before you had children.
Now, let's talk about Samantha. She was a very well put together character who seemed to have life all figured out. However, we kind of get glimpses into parts of her that are perhaps a response to a trauma and a grief from a great loss that she suffered in the past. Can you tell us more about this?
So I will say, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but I think it's something as well. It's written in the front of the book as a trigger warning because it does deal with infant loss. So Samantha has suffered a late-term miscarriage in the past with her then partner, her husband at the time. And that miscarriage became a trigger for the dissolution of their relationship. And I really wanted with Samantha, then when she did fall pregnant, as they were falling apart as a couple, and he decided he wouldn't support her with this, the thing with Samantha that I really wanted to explore was that idea, and this is something that some of the women that I've talked to who've been in this situation about had experienced, this idea that they want to be the perfect mum. There's only one of them. There's not a partner. So they need to be the mum, the dad, the best parent of the year. And also that fear because they have lost a child. So they want to do everything they can to keep this child safe. I mean, obviously every parent wants to keep their child safe, but that increased sense of pressure that they felt was something that came up when I was talking to women who'd been in that situation. And I do have someone very close to me, a relative who has been in a relationship where there's been a late-term miscarriage. And I know how absolutely life-changing and devastating it was for them. And I thought it was something that I wanted to talk about because, again, even though it's an absolutely horrible thing, the more we talk about things like this, the easier it becomes to talk about them. And it doesn't have to be a secret. I mean, one of the things that always has been mystifying to me is why you're not allowed to tell anyone you're pregnant till the 12-week mark, till it's safe. I can understand wanting to keep things a secret, but if things don't work out, if you do have a miscarriage or there is a problem, surely that's the time when you want your community to rally behind you and support you through that. So if we can normalize talks of things like this, I think it can only help.
That's so interesting. Organizations that are dedicated to helping not only women, but also couples through pregnancy losses can be really important in this space as well, in terms of trying to normalize it and, giving support to grieving parents, or even things like the right to have leave when
Yeah.
things like this happen. They're so important. Were there any organizations that you spoke to in particular in relation to these kinds of issues?
I didn't speak to any organizations, but I did, yeah, like I said, I reached out and I spoke to people, both people I knew and people that I didn't know, to find out their experiences. And then I also did a lot of research, a lot of those organizations, and there's a list of them in the back of the book, some great support services. A lot of them have really comprehensive websites where you can get lots of information about the sort of services they provide and the sort of things that they can offer, which I think is amazing.
Now, I'm not sure that we can talk about Tali and her situation without spoilers, but suffice it to say, and I mentioned it a little earlier, that in the months after the birth of a baby, women are at their most vulnerable on so many levels. And Tali is not only lonely, she's far away from her mum and the friends that she left behind in Sydney, but she's also at the mercy of a fiance who likes to, quote unquote, take care of her. I wondered if we could talk about this a little bit and try and do that without spoilers.
We will give it our best shot. I think it's that issue of vulnerability. Like you said, I don't think it gets more vulnerable than having given birth to a child, feeling out of your depth, feeling unsure of your identity, but then to also be stripped away from all those things that you come to depend on, like friendship, like family. I feel like I never wanted my mum as much as I did after I had a kid. So I wanted to explore that issue with her. And also how a sort of theme that I guess runs through the book is this idea that sometimes things might look one way from the outside, but on the inside, they're very different. And that's what I wanted to explore with her story too, because externally it might look like everything is going really well for her because she has this beautiful house with a beautiful garden. Her husband likes for her to entertain where he can cook for their guests. She doesn't have financial concerns as such, but she obviously has some much bigger problems that
one of the sad parts of this story, and that there are a number of, as you said, serious issues that are being discussed in this novel, but part of this that I was a little bit sort of perplexed and sad by was this need for this kind of project to fund something as basic as a space for this mothers group to meet in person on a regular basis, and having to compete with a bloody men's fishing club just so that they can meet to weigh their babies and talk about breastfeeding and connect with other women in the same situation as them. I was enraged by the fact that they had to compete with the men's fishing club, for God's sake, or being told that they should just meet on Zoom or just have a telephone discussion. I mean, it just like blew my mind. Sadly, it doesn't seem very far-fetched, but out of interest, was this something that was based on an issue in the real world?
The issue of the black mold and the air conditioner did come up when I was first writing this book, as it's set. The small town it's set in is based in the sort of Northern Rivers, New South Wales region. And obviously they've been devastated by floods on many occasions, which is heartbreaking. And so I guess that's where the black mold concept came from, and the idea that services are limited, rooms are limited. It wasn't based on an actual example of a women's group or a parents group being evicted from a centre and replaced by the men's fishing club. But as you said, sadly, it doesn't feel too far-fetched. And certainly in some places, you do often still see that lack of gender equality when it comes to distribution of services.
Indeed. Now, you talked about the research, or some of the research that you did, but I wondered if your research kind of like threw up interesting things that you didn't know before you embarked on this novel.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lots of different things. I think that you're always learning when you're writing something. I'm trying to think of things that I can say that aren't too spoilery, because I did a lot of research into different subject areas. And one area in particular, I felt like I learned a lot about. But one of the things that is talked about throughout the novel that's probably a little more lighthearted is when one of the women, when Samantha is preparing to be romantically involved with somebody again, there's talk that comes up, because obviously body image is a theme throughout the novel. And there's talk that comes up of what she should do on a date when it comes to body hair and different treatments that you can get. And I had heard someone say, I remember my beautician telling me once ages ago that you could get a vajazzle, you could bedazzle your vagina, which I had found hilarious. But then when I researched that, all I could find was search results for vajacials, which is a facial for your vagina. And I just was blown away. So I did find out some slightly weird, interesting things. Anyone who listens to this is going to think I am pretty strange.
I don't know, how strange is it compared to like a Brazilian or anything like that? I don't know.
I guess this is true. And I say think I'm pretty strange. That's a horrible thing to say. And I am all for it. More power to vajacials. If that is what is making you feel good about your vagina, you go get a vajacial or a vajazzle. I don't mind either. Both.
Oh, Lauren, I love that. Okay, so we talked about the cover just before we started recording, and I've got to say, what a delight this cover is. The colors and the giant pink maternity bra covered in hearts makes it not only eye-catching, but gives us a huge hint about its subject matter. What did you think when you first saw it?
I loved it. Loved it. I still do. I feel so lucky to be working with such an amazing team. They've done such a beautiful job with the cover. It is just divine.
Yeah. And I think we talked about the fact that while it sort of seems quite fun and lighthearted, with the pastel colors and whatnot, and it's kind of a cartoony cover, it kind of belies the subject matter in many ways. I mean, it kind of gives us a clue, but at the same time, doesn't really hint at the seriousness of the subject matter that you delve into, does it?
This is true. And I know that some people might find that to be disingenuous, but I do really feel that by presenting the story that I wanted to tell, that I was hopefully, like I said, making it easier to talk about some bigger, darker issues by presenting them in this way. Sometimes it can be confronting to read too much in a darker space. So I hope this sort of makes conversations easier.
I'm sure it will. So, Lauren, do you think you'll continue writing women's fiction? And if so, can you tell me about any future projects?
I absolutely will continue writing women's fiction. I adored writing The Calendar Mums, and I am working on another book. This time it still does touch on motherhood, but it is about children who are a bit older now, which I guess is very reflective of my own life with 3 kids, 2 at school and 1 still in daycare. But I want to touch on some big themes there as well. So I mentioned earlier, one of the themes that I'm working on at the moment is this idea of who am I as a woman? What do I do to have fun? What does that look like? And then I also wanted to explore social media, I think is such a big thing, and not just when it comes to kids and social media, obviously, but this idea again of the perception that we put out to the world versus the reality. Perception versus reality is a theme that was running through The Calendar Mums, and it's certainly running through this as well.
I guess I wondered if we were likely to see the Hickory Creek Mother's Group featured in other novels.
Well, I can say that in this book that I'm writing now, there's quite a few calendars getting around. And there is one cameo as well. I wouldn't say they've got a starring role, but I do really feel that in The Calendar Mums, I feel like their stories are complete within that book.
Fair enough. So, Lauren, given your experiences as a writer and an editor, I wondered if you had any tips to offer writers out there looking to either finish that novel that they're working on or seek publication.
You're like, there are so many things. If you're trying to finish the novel that you're working on right now, I think one of the best things to do is to work out what your special writing superpower is. So, hear me out. Some people work well when they write at the same time every day. Some people don't. Some people work well in the morning, some people work well in the evening. We're all different. There's no one way to write a book, but working out when you are feeling the words are coming most naturally, I think that is a really big thing. Another thing that I always recommend doing is when you're writing, only stop writing when you know what the next sentence is going to be. So don't write it, but just walk away when you know what the next part's going to be. Because often when you come back and you sit there and you finally got the time, especially if you're also working or you've got kids or whatever, we've got life. Life is pretty big. Often when you sit down, you don't have this expanse of time before you. And so you need to get things done. And if that's the case, having that entry point, knowing what that next sentence is going to be, that can absolutely make hitting the page again that much easier. So that's probably my 2 things, like, yeah, knowing yourself and when your creativity is flowing and the pattern that you like to work in, whether that's writing every day or writing when inspiration strikes and then stopping for a while, and then trying to leave off your writing when you know what's happening next are probably my 2 biggest tips for when you're writing a book. When it comes to seeking publication, I'm certainly not an expert by any means, but I think we're so lucky in Australia. I feel like a lot of the publishers are accessible. For example, The Calendar Mums, I actually pitched at a Romance Writers of Australia event in 2024. Yes, last year. No, the year before, 2023. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to map this out in my head.
I was going to say that was super quick then.
Yeah, no, that's not right. So I pitched it then, and I pitched it to 3 different publishers, and I also had pitched it to Harlequin directly because I had an existing relationship with them. And I was lucky enough to be in a situation where another publisher also expressed interest, but in the end, Harlequin's always felt like home to me, and I've had a long relationship with them. So I loved being able to stick with them through this process. But so I guess that's another tip, really, like organizations like RWA, the Romance Writers of Australia, or there are so many great organizations like that throughout Australia. The Australian Society of Authors has lots of pitch events, and yeah, so.
Fantastic. And Lauren, if there was one final thing you'd like to say to listeners about this novel, what would that be?
If there's one thing people take away from The Calendar Mums, I hope it's to book in their next vajazzle. No. If there's one thing I hope people take away from The Calendar Mums, I hope that it is that it's that message that as women and as mums, we can do anything. We have so much power to do good and to change and to support other people. And yeah, I hope overall it's just a really uplifting message that comes across and that it makes people feel empowered.
Oh, thank you so much. So well said. That's beautiful. Lauren, it's been so wonderful chatting to you about this inspiring and uplifting book. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.